Hello, everyone. Today is April 22nd, 2021. This is the Kubernetes SIG Storage meeting. So today we have a few design reviews. So first we'll go over this volume restrictions for pod security standard and PSP replacement cap. Then we will go over our 1.22 planning. So this is a good opportunity for new contributors to learn how SIG Storage works. And if you are interested in anything, you can speak up during the planning in this meeting, or you can also pin one of the leads, Sarah, Michelle, Yang, or myself after the meeting to sign up for some work. And looks like we also have another design review on secret protection. Okay, let's get started. So Tim, are you there?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for hosting our topic today.
Should I make you a co-host so you want to share? Let's see.
Sure.
Co-host.
One second. All right, can you see the pod security standards documentation?
Yeah.
All right, so let me just give a bit of background for folks who don't know what we're talking about here. So today, the standard way of limiting pod permissions is through pod security policy. But starting in 121, we've deprecated pod security policy. We sort of have known this was coming for a long time, but didn't have a good path forward. So we were waiting off on that. So pod security policy is deprecated in 121, and we'll be removing it in 125. So we've been discussing, actually, let me switch over to the KEP. We've been discussing for a while what the best way to replace it is. And we've come up with this proposal that's based on these pod security standards that we have documented here. And one of the key differences between this new proposal that we're hoping will replace pod security policy and the previous pod security policy is pod security policy was very configurable. So you define your policy and you say for each of these different control features like host network or privileged containers or capabilities or whatnot, you can say, is this allowed or disallowed under this policy? And define as many policies as you want and bind them to different pods in a somewhat convoluted way. And the new policy instead just defines these three privilege levels. So that's privileged, baseline, and restricted. And privileged is defined as being totally unrestricted, as if you don't even have the admission controller turned on. Baseline is defined as allowing a minimal pod spec. So in other words, if you define a pod, or if you create a pod with just a pod name, a single container that has a name and a container image, and don't fill out any of the other pod spec, that should be allowed under baseline. And of course, anything that's more restrictive is also allowed under baseline. And for things that are elevating privileges beyond that baseline pod, it's a bit of, it's a little fuzzy in terms of what we allow. So some things like a privileged container is clearly more privileged, so we disallow it. But when it comes to volumes, which is actually what we're talking about today, we allow all volumes under baseline except for host path volumes, which we completely forbid. And then the restricted profile is the third one, is much more heavily restricted and follows what we consider to be best practices. So if I scroll down to that, one of the key differences from the baseline policy is running as non-root. We require the seccomp profile, default seccomp profile, which I wish was enabled in baseline, but since it's not, we enable it in restricted. And then notably, we are much more restrictive of volume types. And the philosophy of the volume types was sort of for persistent volumes, rather than using the built-in inline volumes, persistent volumes should be going through the persistent volume and persistent volume claim features. We do allow the built-in ephemeral volume types, so empty dir, projected volumes, secrets, config maps, but we try and disallow all the others. But in yesterday's meeting about, as we try and kind of lock down these, the definition of these different profile levels, we had ended up having a discussion about the CSI volume type and whether we should allow that in restricted. So previously we'd been thinking that, well, CSI volume is another type of volume that should just go through persistent volume types where you have a more privileged user defining the volume, and then you can claim it to the pod. But we realized that actually there's a lot of ephemeral CSI volumes that should maybe be available under the restricted volume type. So yeah, that's sort of setting up the background for this discussion, and where we'd appreciate input from SIG Storage. Does anyone have any questions on what I talked about so far? Or Jordan, is there anything you'd like to
add? This policy is for per namespace, or?
Yeah. So so the way the new policy is bound is through a label on the namespace. Let me just pull that up here. Yeah, so basically we put a label on the namespace that says what privilege level the namespace should run as. So we would have something like pod isolation policy /allow restricted or baseline. And this is, so this is labeled on the namespace and applies to all pods in the namespace with some exceptions through another API.
So my understanding is there are only 3 types, and is it customizable for, let's say, one of the type?
No. So one of the goals of this is to have these policy levels be totally predefined. The idea is that we want to have kind of well-defined, basically best practice policy levels that we think apply to the majority of users. And then for someone who needs more fine-grained control or has kind of advanced or more complicated policy requirements, we're just recommending that they use a third-party admission webhook. So for instance, OPA or Gatekeeper or one of those other options.
Is it possible for a third-party option to also build on top of the ones we provide? Like, can you use these profiles along with Gatekeeper?
Yeah, definitely. So if So the way admission control typically works is each admission controller can say kind of no opinion or deny. So once one admission controller rejects the request, then that kind of rejects it flat out. So if you want to layer on additional restrictions beyond what's here, then it's easy to kind of have this work in parallel with a custom admission plugin. But if you want to potentially relax the restrictions here or kind of come up with your own definitions of the policy levels or something like that, then you would want to disable this admission plugin either through one of the exemption mechanisms or just kind of disable it globally for the cluster and implement your own policies. And to make that easy, we're going to be providing a webhook implementation, a library implementation, and also kind of this well-defined spec, which is noted in the pod security standards documentation, and kind of a suite of tests that test if your implementation meets that spec.
So the specific question we had around CSI, the inline the inline CSI volume source for pods. If you go back to the list of restricted volumes that are forbidden, Tim, we don't want pods in the restricted profile making use of all of these various persistent disk types. I know that there are CSI drivers being implemented for many of those persistent disk types. And we weren't sure if we allowed pods to use the CSI volume source, could they effectively make use of the persistent disk implementations CSI drivers? Like, could they create a GCE persistent disk or a Azure file persistent disk via the CSI volume source? Or does that only allow using ephemeral CSI drivers?
So the answer is possibly. The way that these CSI ephemeral volumes are implemented today is the driver needs to explicitly provide a implementation of it. And I think for the most part, we have tried to sort of encourage the use of this for ephemeral use cases and discourage the use of this feature for persistent use cases. But I think some drivers may have already decided to go ahead and implement the persistent case using this API, even though it wasn't really the intended option. So the answer is it depends on which driver. And I think most of the drivers on this list that are in restricted, their equivalent CSI drivers have not implemented this part of support for this feature, but I think there are like a handful, maybe one or two that have.
Is the table of like the inline volume sources, like I know only a subset of them even have CSI drivers, and then it sounds like only a subset of those provide ephemeral capability. Does that table exist anywhere?
Yeah, I think we can definitely provide the table. I think though there's also like this other concern that there's actually a bunch of new CSI drivers that don't have intrigue equivalents, but they may have also implemented support for this.
In general, is it reasonable for like an ephemeral volume, if that is created, does an ephemeral volume mean the volume is provisioned for this pod and then torn down when the pod goes away?
Yes.
Yes.
And does that mean that it would be safe for a restricted pod to make use of that, or does it really depend on like how dangerous the volume attributes are that the CSI driver does stuff with?
Yeah, I think it depends on the actual attributes that the CSI driver exposes. If say the CSI driver exposed attributes similar to how the in-tree inline volumes expose their attributes, then that would be a problem.
On the
But
other hand, like the persistent volumes, they use volume handle to identify the volume in the storage backend. And we don't have that in the inline CSI volumes. As far as
Yeah,
I
so the
remember.
volume handle is generated and is unique per pod, but the concern is, like, depending on the CSI driver implementation, maybe one of the volume attributes it consumes is something like, what host path should I mount this thing to? Like, we don't know.
yeah,
Of course,
yeah,
this can happen.
it's also, yeah, like we don't give the volume handle, but it's also possible the CSI driver could have exposed their own custom attribute that is essentially a volume handle.
So the philosophy that we've gone with for a lot of kind of the extension points in the pod is if it's something that's controlled by the cluster administrator, or like requires kind of cluster scoped, highly privileged permissions, we sort of are saying like trust them to do the right thing, or implement kind of appropriate protections if necessary. Of course, we prefer to provide more guidance in that. But
Yeah,
I think there's sort of, yeah, go ahead.
I think in this case, like it could potentially fall under like the CSI driver author, like it falls under them to like design their APIs to, you know, fit the security models that we recommend.
We have the flag in the CSI driver that tells if the driver supports this ephemeral volume or not.
Right. I guess
that.
our question is like, is it generally reasonable to say restricted pods can use ephemeral volumes, and if you're going to deploy an ephemeral CSI driver that is unsafe, then you need to restrict use of that by quota or by custom admission. Like, I'm trying to think if there are other equivalent things on a restricted pod that would open holes that an admin might not realize exist. Like even the new ephemeral volume type in the pod, you're limited to things that you can express on a persistent volume claim. So you don't have that like full control over volume attributes that you do under CSI.
Like I can imagine some host path like CSI ephemeral volumes that could be fine for some namespaces and could be super dangerous for other namespaces.
Yeah.
So we are allowing them under the baseline policy. So if you're doing something as dangerous as exposing host paths, then we would probably say you need to pair it with custom admission control.
At the same time, like I can have super safe secret provider that uses this inline CSI volumes, and I want everybody to use it.
Right. That's kind of the motivation behind us wanting to allow it, but also wanting admins to know if you've got a dangerous ephemeral CSI driver, you have to guard that.
And what would be the
So
way how to guard it?
we have the CSI driver object, where when you install the CSI driver, you have to declare if it supports this ephemeral mode or not. That might be a way we can potentially try to restrict things, but it would still have to be on like a per driver basis.
Yeah, so there's sort of three options we're considering here. One is actually what we had originally proposed and probably over-restricted, is just to say, no, you can't use inline CSI driver volumes with the restricted profile. The next option is to basically say that's the default, but provide some sort of escape hatch or configuration mechanism, either statically configured or through the object that you just mentioned, to say like, well, we say this volume is safe, so allow this one. Kind of an allow list approach. The other option is to say we just allow all inline CSI drivers, and if it's unsafe or restricted, then it's the responsibility of the author and or cluster admin to layer on additional policy.
How does this, like, we know that this three policies can be added to the namespace, but what decides which namespace we gets which policy? Like what is the default if I just install a Kubernetes cluster?
So to be backwards compatible and to be able to enable this by default, if you don't indicate a policy level for a namespace, it doesn't restrict the namespace. So it's up to the person provisioning the namespaces. Generally, in a cluster where you want to lock down some users of the cluster, you don't generally give those locked down users like permission to create their own namespaces and like do things globally. So there's usually a provisioning step and an access granting step that sets up a namespace and then gives a user access to that namespace. And so part of that would be deciding what access level that user should have.
And that is configurable, or the default is going to be configurable through a static flag or manifest. But the default is privileged.
So back to the three options. I admit I kind of like the existing PSP where the admin like says these drivers are safe, these drivers are not safe. Where would it fall in your options you provided?
I think that sounds like it falls into either like the second option where we have allow lists of specific drivers, or it falls into the maybe this is the fourth option where we defer this to like a gatekeeper or someone to layer on more restrictive policies.
So if the purpose of restricted policy is kind of more towards unrestricted, right? I feel like adding CSI, because the CSI driver could be very arbitrary, and we don't have much of control of that. And so if you want to more towards on the restrict side, I feel adding the CSI is safer. I don't know how many use cases we using CSI ephemeral storage. It's relatively new, and
I think it's going to be pretty pervasive, especially for there's a lot of like I think Cert Manager and like Vault and other really popular secret management mechanisms there. They've all started using this.
Yeah, it is new, but usage is increasing, and this is sort of the direction we've been telling people who wanted to do custom injection into pods to go. So it's kind of the only option really for this category of integration.
Yeah. So I guess to use this feature, someone needs to install CSI driver that supports it. They also need to set the field in the CSI driver object, which is a non-namespaced object. So they already need some sort of higher permissions to be able to enable this, to be able to enable these kinds of CSI drivers in the cluster.
Given a CSI driver implementation, like the actual binary piece that they install, can you toggle that ephemeral or inline field on the CSI object on and off, and like have it kind of work interchangeably with the same driver? In other words, if a driver kind of shipped with the manifest that has it enabled, could an admin say, well, I don't actually want to give users access to this, so I'm going to just kind of turn this feature off?
That should.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a CSI driver object with the field that specifies whether ephemeral is supported or not. They could toggle that. And I think all the controllers that look at that field should do the right thing.
Although I don't know if you already have volumes mounted with it, would that cause volumes to fail to be unmounted or something like that?
By default, that is immutable, but yeah, you could delete and recreate it.
Well, for safety, you would want to create it with the feature off from the beginning, so it was never on.
Right.
Yeah, but sorry.
Since baseline allows CSI, I think going back to Tim's point, if you have an ephemeral CSI driver that is exposing like behavior you would consider unsafe or escalating, like host path, or consuming volume attributes that like give you direct control over like kernel parameters or something like really significantly escalating, I think you would not want that ephemeral driver accessible, or you would want to protect it, but with quota or ignition. I think the biggest question for me would be if the CSI driver is corresponding to those known inline volume sources support ephemeral by default. Knowing that would be helpful.
I think I'm leaning towards just allowing CSI drivers for restricted and basically solving this through documentation. On the kind of pod security side, we would say, if you have an unsafe CSI driver, then we recommend either disabling inline definitions or adding an admission control. And then maybe on the CSI documentation side, we could say we recommend only using the inline, only enabling inline volumes for things that should be safe to restricted users.
Maybe a stupid question. Can we add a flag to the CSI driver object if it should be available to restricted, baseline, or only privileged?
This was one of the options we were considering, and I am not a fan of that because it makes evaluation of a policy against a given pod spec stateful. Like if you say, does restricted allow this pod spec? Right now, we don't need any other cluster state to answer that question. But as soon as you make it configurable per driver via the API, now you need to like The answer is it depends. Like it depends on which cluster you're in.
And one reason we want to avoid that is it makes it a lot harder to run this in, say, like CI tests, or off of your Git repo without installing it on the cluster itself.
And it also makes the answer change over time. So you can have cases like, oh yeah, well that policy level allowed this pod yesterday, but now that attribute on CSI driver changed, and so this pod is no longer allowed by this policy level. Like changing results over time is not desirable.
That also implies that the list of allowed CSI drivers can be basically anywhere, because that list can change.
Yeah, so if allowing, if you're talking about policy level, like what pod specs are allowed, does anything prevent creation of a pod that has a CSI driver that references a driver name that does not exist or is not ephemeral? Or is that a runtime error? Like it lets me create the pod, and then when it goes and gets scheduled, and then the kubelet tries to do stuff with it, at that point, I
think it's runtime.
It's runtime. Okay.
You don't have any admission for that.
Okay.
That's what I was saying, that like there's nothing stopping anyone from using CSI ephemeral volume as a persistent CSI inline volume, like provided they put the handle in the parameters field, not in, yeah.
I don't think that's true. When I traced it, it only like if it's pulling the volume source from a pod spec, it requires the associated driver to have like the ephemeral mode flag set.
I mean, sure, it could be said, but given a volume handle in the parameter, it could be used as like like for sure say that when the pod is deleted, the volume will be deleted. No, right? Like if it had a handle like a vSphere handle or a AWS handle, then it's be persistent.
Yeah, a given driver that says it supports ephemeral mode could always be buggy, or could like. I'm not as concerned about that. I'm mostly concerned about whether the known CSI drivers for the existing in-tree inline types are saying they support ephemeral mode or not. That's one question. And then whether it's reasonable to say if you're going to deploy ephemeral CSI drivers that are unsafe or allow like escalation, like it's your job to protect against pods using those. We don't want to take your whole meeting, so I feel like we should. There are a couple questions I think we can get answered out of this, and then circle back. So I'm happy to let you continue your meeting and not take over anymore.
So, yeah, so we want to start with that 1.22 planning, but I think, yeah, this is a great discussion. So do we want to schedule another one to continue, or do we want to continue the discussion on mailing list, or how do you want to?
Maybe can we document the action items here, and then we can maybe follow up on those action items and decide if we need another meeting?
Okay.
I put one, which was the table of entry drivers, CSI drivers, and whether they support ephemeral. I think the other was more of a question, which was like, is it okay to say if you're doing ephemeral CSI drivers that are unsafe, you should protect against pods using them? Like you're responsible for that.
I saw that David Eads just joined the meeting. He was the one who originally raised this this topic to us.
Yeah, I plan to watch the recording. I see whether it's already in progress, and it definitely was. So I'll watch the recording. If I have questions, I'll probably start on Slack.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Tim, can you, I think you are still sharing. So
Oh, sorry.
that's okay. Okay, thank you.
I'll probably drop off, but thanks for having us.
Hey, thank you for joining and bring this issue for discussion.
Xing, since we have
Yes.
20 minutes left, should we just do the other design review that's on the agenda today, get done with that, and then move the planning session to the next meeting?
Okay, next
Or
meeting will be, it's
2
kind of,
weeks? Yeah.
is that the like the KubeCon week?
Oh, I forgot about that.
uh,
Okay, in that case, let's just get it
Maybe
started.
we should
now then.
start a little bit. I think a lot, we may have a lot of new contributors today, so probably we should even just get started with the just
Okay,
to show
let's do it.
how the
Let's see how much we can get through. Yeah.
okay. All right. All right. So this is our planning sheet. Yeah. So I think Asad, you copied this one from the 1.21. So we start with this. So basically, we will continue the items that we didn't finish in 1.21. And then if there are anything new that are not included here, you can feel free to add on this spreadsheet. So just to go over this, let's see how much we can cover, and then we'll continue in the next meeting. Okay, so the first one is delegate FS group to CSI driver instead of kubelet. This is so this is Hermont. This we will continue to do alpha in 1.22.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. This one's to look okay.
The enhancement is already merged. Just we are blocked on CSI spec change. I'll try and get that done.
Okay. Oh, cap is all. You say cap is already merged. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. And the next one is CSI online, offline resize. Okay, so this one and the next one, those are related, right? So it's Haman, so yours.
Yeah, we fixed some issues and I have to write some new caps or update existing caps. So I'll be working on this on this quarter.
Okay, so this is still, we basically we keep it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beta. Yeah.
We may. Okay. Beta. And then the next one, are we targeting alpha for the next one? We still design the recover part.
Yeah, we should target alpha for that one.
Okay. Let's keep. Okay. All right. And then, okay, then we should change this target. Oh, okay. So this one changes to 22. This one.
And can you clear the status as you go, just for to know that we've
so the
end
the end status, right? So just say
yeah, you could just delete both of them for now. Honestly, just leave them empty.
This is like end of okay. Just delete these 2 columns. You mean?
No, just empty the cell.
Oh, okay, sure.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And okay, the next one, secure Linux recursive permission handling. Is Yang working on this? Still for 1.22, are you still working on this?
Jan is not working on this.
Okay,
so we can either, well, it still needs to be fixed, but I'm pretty sure I will not have time this quarter. And I didn't find anybody else who would know about this Linux. So we can either put it somewhere on the bottom of the list and perhaps not do it this time, or even delete it. I may find somebody later, but since this is only design, we can always introduce the gap and review it without the issue.
Stay in design. Looking for the owner, is that or for someone else?
Oh, yes, looking for owner.
Okay. Thank you. And then next one is the CSI entry read only handling this.
Yeah, so for
Okay.
this one, for the one PR that was outstanding, I know Humble, I think, is here as well. If you don't have time to work continuing that PR, I'm happy to push that forward as well. But I think early on when we discussed this item, if I remember we were talking about there might be a larger CSI entry read-only refactor, if I understand correctly. That one, I don't think I would have time to work on.
Okay.
So for the PR, yeah, for the PR, I'm good to go. I can continue working on that.
Okay. Thank you. And next one is issues related to assuming volumes are mount points. Xing, do you know the status for this? Is Xing still on the call?
Yes.
Okay.
So like I mentioned last time, the RSPR was reverted. The rest, I think, merged. The PR reverted, but is not ready to merge yet because the race condition between volume management and the pod is a known issue. So we don't have a good solution yet. We'll keep that item like in mind, and then we'll work on it as soon as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Next one, storage capacity tracking. So
yeah, it just entered beta. I think no changes planned for 1.22.
Okay. And do we still have anything else to do for this PVC line FM, or is this completely?
No, it's also beta. So the same status.
Okay.
It is beta. It will stay in beta in 1.22.
Sure.
Yeah. I see that you stroke out or almost deleted the CSI ephemeral volumes.
I don't. Yeah, this one was deleted already in the old spreadsheet. I don't know why this one is deleted. Should we bring this back?
Yeah, I think you should, because it is beta. It has been beta since 1.16.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how long we have to do something about it.
Okay.
Under the new guidelines for beta features.
Do we have? Okay. Is Matt working on this?
No, we are not.
Okay.
We don't have plans to do this before the second half of the year, which will miss 122.
Okay, so maybe 1.23 then. But okay. Or does anyone else want to work on this?
Do we know what is missing there?
Is this
well?
Are there still any concerns? I think we are clear on the differences now, right? Do we have any?
I think there was some suggestion about changing the API a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when we discussed the generic ephemeral volumes, we said that the existing CSI type is just too confusing, which should be renamed. The enhancement issue for it has captured those discussions, but yeah, there is an API change proposed. The other more technical or procedural issue is that this whole feature doesn't have a cap in the current format. So cap reviewers might ask before making changes, before moving it to GA to update the cap, actually define some GA criteria, because all of that is currently missing.
Okay.
Before we know whether it's ready for GA, we first would have to define what that means, and then there's this API change. So I don't think it's currently ready for GA.
Okay. So probably you do like a second beta. Is that, can we go directly to beta just if we make some API change?
I don't know how to do that from a technical procedure.
Okay, so still, so this one still needs some need some work. Okay.
A question I have around this, I mean, given that I understand the use cases for this like are around like certs and secrets and stuff. I mean, I know in Google there was a security team that was using this or interested in using this. I don't know if I guess that my point is like someone who's engaged in one of these actual use cases is going to be a lot more motivated to drive this forward, I think, than it sounds like anyone here.
Okay. So maybe we'll, okay, so we're looking for a new owner then?
Yeah, I mean, like I in the second half of this year, I may be able to engage with those people I know, but I don't know if anyone else here, possibly Michelle, knows, has been talking to people who are.
I'm talking to the same people you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we'll see if we got a new owner. Otherwise, we continue in 1.23 then.
Like maybe, would it be worth it to, maybe we don't have to do this here, but it might be worth it to like separate this spreadsheet into like items where we're potentially looking for help or owners on. That could help us like, kind of ask for help in certain areas.
Or maybe add a new column saying this is like need owner column or something.
Yeah, that could work too.
Or a new column. Okay, we can figure out details later. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next one, yeah, so this is spreading over failure domain, and the next one, working group API for consistent groups. Those two are related. The spreading one is actually dependent on the second one. I think there's still some design issues with the supporting group. So we'll see if we can get the tab merged. That'll be great. So I think I'll leave that in design for now. Next one is CS out of tree move SCSI driver. Is this oh, this is Christian in progress? Okay.
Still needs to be carried over to the next release. We got the SCSI driver added to the staging, the SIG storage staging, but we still need to add the automation for building and promotion.
Okay.
And so I should be able to address this next release.
Okay. Thanks. And okay, so then we have our NFS provisioner and NFS client provisioner. So those, okay, so Karen are working on those. Is Karen here? Looks like it's just a doc update. I don't know what else is needed for this one other than doc. Michelle, do you know? Is this complete or we still have docs?
I think it's complete. Yeah, I think we don't need to track this.
Okay. And then the next one too, right? Next one is also complete. Oh, then we'll just
yeah,
cross out this too. Okay. Thank you. Next one is PVC volume snapshot namespace transfer question. So continue. You're trying to do alpha for this one, or?
I think alpha would be a bit aggressive. There are still some blockers that we need to address, and I'm not certain how to address them. And this all deals with transferring CSI secrets and how to respect those boundaries. So it's something that I would like to continue working on the design in this next release.
Okay, so design, so that's still okay. Just so we'll keep that in design. Okay, and that next one is the boarding house. So this will be staying in alpha. We have a meeting tomorrow to talk about use cases and what are we going to next. So we'll decide, yeah, if we're going to. Yeah, so I think there are a few use cases that I heard about, and we can talk more about that in tomorrow's meeting.
Is there any chance the feature would go to beta depending on the outcome of those discussions, or staying off no matter what?
So I think beta is still, yeah, I think beta is also possible. But the thing is, right now I don't know any CSI driver has implemented yet. I'd like to see at least some CSI driver has implemented that. Right now, we only have that in the CSI hostpad driver.
Okay.
So we'll see. You know, so maybe we'll see if they need the driver implementation.
Yeah, it might be good. It might be good to like send out an email to the CSI announce list or something like that, saying that this feature is now available. Please try it out and give us your feedback.
Okay, yeah, good idea. Sure. Yeah, so I think, so one thing is the existing feature, right? Bring it to beta. And then the second thing is, I think there are some requests on making this feature available so we can actually do some reaction when something happens. So that will need some changes to the existing design. But I think that can be like a new feature gate or something. We'll see what that is. But the existing one, if it's just events, I think that's still helpful. We can bring that to beta if we have people actually use that, saying that is useful. Okay. And the next one, okay, this is the volume populator, Ben.
Yeah, this one did not go to beta in 121, so the goal is to go to beta in 122.
Okay.
So this just needs a re-review of the KEP and a small core change, and all of the out of tree stuff should just be able to be, re-released as beta, unless changes are required.
Okay, thank you. And then Cozy. Okay, so.
Yeah, this is Srini. I can give you an update. We are waiting on Tim still to get the API review. Hopefully, we need to get that done as soon as possible. And about the community meeting, we had long discussions around the credential rotations. Essentially, we decided that most of the cloud providers are not providing support for that. We would probably provide support with the basic service account-based auth. Our current focus is on the development, and we are ramping it up. We have a community web page that's coming up, which will allow us to onboard more people to write drivers. I have a repo that created for Minia driver, and the ETE is in progress so that we could test with Minia driver as our reference driver. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. And then we're targeting alpha, right? You want to change you?
That's right. That's right.
Thank you. Okay, changeable tracking. I think we'll still be doing design. This is still quite a few things we need to sort out. Next one is the new read-only access mode. Do we have Chris here?
Yes. So I have a prototype of this working. The KEP is filled out for alpha and received first round feedback on that. And I'm currently working on documenting the version skew behavior for this. So
we are targeting alpha, right? In 122. Yes. Okay.
What about the CSI spec change?
What about it?
That would be a prereq to get this in, right? Is a CSI spec change?
This is true. Am I able to do that within the same time frame?
Yeah.
But I think just do that early, right?
Yeah, you got to do it early.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
There is I think there's a proposed 122 schedule, and I think the feature freeze is tentatively like around end of May. Although I think there are discussions about moving it 2 weeks earlier. So like mid-May.
Doesn't seem good. I thought it's 4 months, but it seems to be still pretty short.
Well, code freeze is a little longer. I think code freeze is going to be early July. So you're going to have like
July. I thought
maybe
it's June.
1 or 2 weeks more for code freeze, but the actual enhancements freeze, I don't think is going to be really extended in terms of dates.
Okay, so where does the extra time go? Is it testing after the code freeze?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
There's like 1 to 2 weeks extra for code freeze, and then probably more time for testing and documentation and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
So we got to do a time check. There's a meeting after this.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We already passed time. Okay, thanks. All right. So yeah, I think we went through more than half of this. So we'll continue in our next meeting. Yeah, so for anyone who are new contributors who are interested in contributing, if you have any questions or want to help with anything, feel free to reach out to us after the meeting. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.